Well, welcome everyone to the final episode of Haunted. I'm Dorothy-holder, and today, episode 6, we're looking at the curse of the pharaohs. Now, what can we say about King Tutankhamun's tomb? You know, it's an interesting thing because it's one of these hotly debated areas, and it's hotly debated because it's really famous for a start. You've also got scientists commenting, which is okay, or I shouldn't say scientists, to be honest. I should say scientific journals commenting. You've got the newspapers of the day, like the New York Times. You've got the Guardian in the UK, which is a very big newspaper. You've got them all commenting about it, and then you've got a certain amount of sensationalism. This is way before we've got the internet and the bloggers and the YouTubers all trying to get people to view so they can get the advertising revenue, trying to sensationalize. Quite interestingly, the very thing that, you know, fringe dwellers like ourselves complain about with media is exactly what bloggers and fringe dwellers are doing to get money. That's why people do these things. That's why the media does it. It's why bloggers do it. It's why YouTube bloggers do it. It doesn't matter. The idea there is if we sensationalize it, we'll get more hits. If we get more hits, we get more money. It's that simple. For some, you know, fame and fortune might go hand in hand. They want to be noted. They want to have lots of followers. They want to have lots of this and that. It doesn't really matter, but usually there is money involved. If you go to anything that's got money involved, you may need to think a little bit about where the kernel of information is correct and where the sensationalism starts. You know, it's something to really take into account. In a modern world, we have this interesting thing called choice. In America in particular, but in other countries too, Western countries, the idea of having lots of choices of one product, for example, you don't just want to have 4 or 5. Apparently that's not enough as a choice. You've got to have 20 or 30 different styles. And then, of course, we are aware, unless we're completely blind, deaf and dumb, that out of those choices, 8 of them are owned by one company. So, and the another 6 are owned by one company and so on. And so really the choice is an illusion. And so I like the idea that we could bring that back and just remove the illusion from your choice and determine that you have a choice as to what you invest your time and energy into. This is a bit off topic, but recently I had a discussion about when it comes to women's magazines. In the 90s, there was a study done that showed that within the first 3 pages, please note that 3 pages, the average woman felt worse about herself, her body, her looks, her life, than she did before she opened the magazine up. And then there was a bit of a hue and a cry because then the question became, but aren't you supposed to be making women feel better? The answer is actually, no, they're not. Their job is to make money from advertising revenue, and the only way to do that is to sell products that women are going to be told they need. And the only way to do that is to make women feel like they need it. And the only way to do that is to make women feel less good about themselves. That is, they're not beautiful enough, they're not shapely enough, especially in the 90s, but even now, although it's not quite as fanatical, there's always a diet in these books, there's always makeup in these books, there's always clothes on celebrities, etc. And so we as women, I don't buy them, but women are buying into something because the demand is there. Now, over the years, we've been told that actually we're being fed information. I don't like that either. I don't like to think that the majority of the world, men, women, children and adults, children maybe, are mindless plebs that just swallow up everything they're fed. I really don't like that. I think it's an insult to the average human being. Demand a product fails. And in marketing, if you go and learn anything about marketing strategies, anything at all, and business practices, you will learn that if there is not a market for what you are offering, people will not buy it. It is that simple. You can't create a demand without first creating the need. That is to say, if you're a pharmaceutical company, it's probably in your interest to make people sick so that you can cure them. It's very, very sad, but also true. When you look at other things, though, you've got to first question, if you can't prey on a person's anxiety, the thing is that you understand the anxiety was already there, right? You get that. A person who isn't anxious isn't going to go out and do that. When you've got forget good food against bad food, if you don't want the product, if there is not a demand for it, it tastes good, it looks good, I want it in my life because it makes me look good, whatever those things are, then it's us creating that demand. Women have worn makeup way, way before there was TV and magazines or even colour to show what that might look like. Even decent mirrors. They were wearing makeup before there were decent mirrors. So we need to understand that about ourselves. We create the demand for the sensationalism. We create the demand for the lie. We create the demand for the exaggeration. And if you start right there, then you can be more discerning when you look at these things. We don't have to feed the beasts, if you like. We don't have to feed the nasty guys. If you are attracted to those things, then there's something in you that needs or wants that demands that in your day-to-day life. So we're there. Sometimes it's a belief, and I suppose we're back to that. My favorite discussion: belief dictates the experience. And when we come to belief, what we're looking at when it comes to the things that are cursed and haunted, if we believe absolutely in it and totally in it, we lose the advantage of choice and by discernment, informed choice. If we absolutely don't believe in it, we lose an opportunity to exercise our minds, to exercise our discernment, to exercise our discretion even as to what we would choose to take on as a truth or a non-truth. In other words, if you expect a lie, even the truth is going to appear as a lie to you. You will find fault, whether it's linguistic fault. I've seen some pretty horrendous skeptics, and I'm using that word with inverted commas because skeptic is a person who is not sure about something. It is not a person who is certain that something is not. And if we start looking at that, you can look at skeptics of the ages, and especially in a modern time where some people's only claim to fame, in fact, is being a skeptic. Some other people's only claim to fame is being a believer. When you take those two things and you look at them as polar opposites, the skeptic is a believer, just the opposite side of the believer on any, whatever the subject matter might be. It's an interesting thing to see skeptics in blogging materials putting out arguments about things that have been fact and proven. And you go, well, where's the skepticism in that? You don't believe the believer and you don't believe the science. Therefore, you have a belief of your own. Now, to a certain extent, that belief in itself, if it's that hardcore, is something that they are too timid to put forward themselves in case they get shot down, which is kind of interesting also. So anyway, moving away from that, the reason I go into this little diatribe just about every show is to say, set that all aside, set aside your beliefs, and just have a look at the facts. Now, there are a lot of things around King Tut's tomb, I should say Tutankhamun just to be polite, his tomb, that are phenomenal. And when we move on to the next series of Planets of the Gods, which is coming up after this, actually, we'll have 1 week off, and then we'll go to the Planets of the Gods as the next series. Now, there's going to be 6 of those as well, so I've shortened our series just a little bit. That Tutankhamun's tomb, in fact, features in the very first episode of that too, so you can come along there and find out why. That also has a bearing. These things are related. If you think about, entanglement, and if you think about what has historical reference and mythology got to do with the present day, you kind of find yourself in this cursed area as well, this haunted area where there is energy. As I've mentioned before, you can energetically infuse an inanimate object with energy that can be felt by others. As an energy therapist, not only have I done this, but I've seen the result of that. And I'm not talking about somebody miraculously getting better, although there's been a bit of that going on. You see people in a particular environment that don't know that item has been infused with energy, and they can't help themselves. At some point, they're drawn to it. They pick it up, they hold it for a while, and they walk away. And you can see that depending on what you've infused it with, they may release energy, which I had in my office, by the way. They may release a situation that's going on. They may become more verbal, communicative, which was my main intention when it was in the office. I'd have an item sitting on the table at home that most people would look at and not touch normally, but once it was infused, just about everybody that came into that room for a time would pick it up at some point. And I thought that was really interesting. And that was just to feel good, just to feel better, feel good, take on a bit of energy, pump yourself up. Now, I would never tell them I'd done that because I think blind studies are the best. Don't tell somebody you've sent them energy and see what happens to them. And as they come back and say, I've just had this marvelous week. I used to work as a road inspector. And while I was doing that, and this is just really about energy, which is what haunted or cursed is about, whether you believe in people being alive on some level after they've died and being malevolent. You can also believe in them being benevolent, right? But there's no fun in talking about that side of things. It's about, can the influence happen? Now, once I've infused these items, I've just got to say before I talk about this lady that I helped out one day, I've got to say that as far as I'm aware, the energy doesn't dissipate or run away. It may do, I don't know, but I haven't seen it yet. And I haven't had to reinfuse items or otherwise. It's a great technique for babies and children that are maybe sickly, that need a little help on more long term than you can stand there and offer them. It can help a person who's got depression. These are the wonderful, wonderful aspects of that. There's hypnotherapy is a more cognitive and conscious approach, and it is cognitive to a certain extent. But this is something that you can do and send out to people that they're not even aware you're doing, and just sit back and see what the changes might be. That in itself is a real eye-opening experience, by the way. So when we come back to what happened this particular day, I was working as a road inspector. I did that for a number of years. And one of the ladies that was working with me, I just said to her, she knew what I did, by the way. She knew that I was an energy therapist on the side. At that time, it was on the side. She knew that I was practicing stuff. And I just said to her, I'll tell you what, I don't want to tell you why I'm putting this in or what I'm putting in, but if I give you something, it's a symbol, and I told her this much. I said exactly this. It's a symbol, and I want you to tell me at the end of the day anything you noticed about your day, whatever it was. And so she said, sure, okay. I did tell her that the symbol had a purpose. I just didn't tell her what the purpose was, so I didn't want her to just come back to me and say, I felt really good all day, because actually that's quite likely. But I did that. Now, what I put in there was a symbol that is known to be, and I love it, it's one of my favorites, it's known to shift time to a certain extent. And you see that this is a stretching of the mind to go, well, can you do that? Well, I believe it's how you move through time. It's a bit about your timing. And by being in the right timing, in actual fact, things do go smoother. We know that's true. When you hit the sweet spot of timing, you miss all the red lights. You just get all the green lights. You miss all the traffic, whatever might happen. A car pulls out and you pull in. All of those right things happen, and it feels very smooth and very sweet. So we were walking up this road, not together. We were walking opposite sides of a major road. It took 4 hours just to do this one road, her doing one side, me doing the other. And, of course, we have to walk in opposite directions. So I'm saying we're not together, we're not chatting, we're not having the exact same experience. We get back to the beginning, and, of course, this is a system I'd used for myself a lot. And bearing in mind that in that job, although I was very fit, it was often mentioned how much I got done and how well it was done. So when we come back to the end and we're driving back to the office, I asked her, okay, so how did your day go? And she said, well, it's the darndest thing. And I love anything that starts like that after I've done something, to be honest. It's like, ooh, goody, goody. And she said, it's the darndest thing. She says, I can't say, she said, I did feel a bit uplifted. She said, but apart from that, she said, it felt very normal. She said, but when I got to the end, I looked at how much time I had spent to do it and how much information I had got and how much I had covered. And I was really surprised that it wasn't another hour or so work in there, or close to another hour. She said, I was really surprised at the time it took. She was a lot older than me and a lot less fit than me, and she did it in the same time as me, just so as we understand that little bit. Then she said, I started thinking when I looked at the time what had changed, and she couldn't think of one thing. She said, I felt like I was putting in the same effort as normal. She said, I felt like I had the same things going on. I had the right amount of information for each section that I did, which is we had to handwrite back then. We had to handwrite all of our information. So you're writing and you're walking, and sometimes that means you've got to stop to write, et cetera, et cetera. So you could do it faster if you weren't gathering the right amount of information, in other words. Then we've got traffic, and we've got to wait for that, and so on and so on. You've got to wait for traffic to move over the road so you can look at the road. Because it's a main road, you couldn't walk onto it. So at the end of all of this, she's going, I can't believe how fast I did that. And I know I have all the right amount of information, etc. And she marveled at that. And a week later, she was chatting to me in the morning room at the office, and she said, I keep thinking back to that. And she said, the right thing to say is that everything just went like magic. It went very smoothly. That's all I can think of, because there's no point there where she felt that she had done anything faster, and yet the job had ended. Now, this is a lady who'd been doing it for nearly 15 years. She knew exactly where she was at. So we can change things by applying certain frequencies of energy to that. For myself one day, when I'd been using this particular symbol for that particular job, I have used it for getting places before, from one place to another in a little bit faster time frame without speeding, by the way. And I was walking up the street, and I was walking and doing my writing thing as you do. And so that meant basically that although I walked quickly, it didn't necessarily put me as faster than other people. But this jogger came up and started running past me this particular day, and she looked around at me and she said, "I can't believe it took me this long to catch up with you because you're just walking." And she said, "And I saw you stopping and writing." And I didn't think too much of that. And I thought, well, I knew I walked quickly because that was my job, and I've been doing it for a few years and I was pretty fit. But it occurred to me again later that, excuse me, that she was saying something very profound to me because she didn't know about me, she didn't know who I was. All she could see is this is this lady walking up the road and she's jogging, and she was taking quite a long time to catch up to me for a jogger, and she wasn't actually jogging horribly slow. Then I started to think a little bit about this time-shifting thing a little bit differently. Anyway, back to the subject matter because I wandered off, as I do. We start with the opening of the tomb. Now, Tutankhamun's tomb has something a little different to all of the other tombs that were opened through Egypt up to this time, up to 1923 when Howard Carter opened up the tomb, or found the tomb and then opened up. Lord Carnarvon was his backer. That needs to be said because he comes into the story. It's this interesting thing that it was the only tomb that had been found to that date that had not been plundered, that had not had its riches taken, it had not had its stuff taken. The interesting thing to me about that, if you're into Egyptology at all, which I am significantly, if you're into that at all, one of the most powerful things to get about that is there's a whole pile of artifacts that have been taken, sold on the black market, hidden away, and people are not admitting that they've got them, because to admit that they've got them is to give them back, which is the most selfish, heinous thing I could ever imagine. I understand why people did that, by the way. I don't understand why rich people, organizations, or religions would continue to hide these artifacts, especially religions and especially educational facilities, regardless of the fact, because it's not going to cost them any money to give it back. And before we say yes, it does, I'm going, no, it doesn't. Because if they bought it in 1927 or if they bought it in 1804, compared to today, it costs them nix. And so it's now an artifact hidden in a drawer, down in that they can't show anybody, they can't do anything with it, or they have to sort of swear people to secrecy if they want to show it to them, because they have to give it back if the word gets out there, because that's how it works today. Every country's claiming their stuff back because they know that it was sold illegally to start with because it was stolen. So quite an interesting thing. So here's a call to the people that are never going to listen to this show, I suppose. Give the bloody stuff back. Let the nations find their history. Let them understand themselves a little bit better. Now we go to the second thing. The curse itself is a real interesting and hotly debated. There are a amount of articles, the number of articles, in fact, that I read researching this recently as well as in the past, that state there was no curse, there's no curse written on the wall, there's no curse on the door, blah, blah, blah. They are actually telling you the truth. There is no curse written on the doors, the walls. Does that mean anything? Absolutely not, because there's something that goes bigger and deeper than that. There were articles that were sensationalizing, which brings us back to the modern blogger. At the time, because it sold newspapers, they would make a big deal that the curse was written on the wall, or it was written here, or it was written there. But the truth was, it just isn't. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle jumped up and said there was some horrible evil involved in this when there was a death following the opening of the tomb and so on. The thing here is that there is general and written and scholastic knowledge of a curse. So the source of the curse comes from Christine al-Mahdi, or not from, but she describes that it was the Arab peoples of Egypt in the 1st century AD who were the first to suggest that a mummy could come to life and attack anyone who broke into a pharaoh's tomb. This idea remained popular partly because the ancient Egyptian language and culture had long since been suppressed, and so there was no one to correct any misunderstanding. Now, the interesting thing is she's written it in that way. So what she's telling you is that there is nobody who could read the original text anymore according to her knowledge, because that's all you got. And she's also saying, and ignoring a little bit, because she's a doctorate of Egyptology, that there's this, they're not telling you about oral history. They're not telling you, and of course the Aboriginals in Australia are the best teachers of this. The Inuits are great teachers of this, that their oral histories are survival histories, they are developmental and evolutionary histories, and accurate as all hell. And we tend to treat oral histories as if they're not. I don't get why writing something down in a dark cellar under a church somewhere is more accurate after it's been told to you by 7 people, different people, is more accurate than the oral traditions handed down. It makes no sense to me. If somebody's writing it down and they didn't actually witness it, or even if they did, it's their opinion of what they saw, how they felt about what they saw. And there was always plenty of exaggeration in that. So we know that history books are not necessarily going to give us facts as such. They're giving us accounts as they understand them. Now, within there will be a kernel of truth, and there always is. There's no doubt about that. But again, what we're looking at here is Christine is saying, there is an oral tradition here that comes to light in writing in the 1st century after Christ. So we're talking how many thousands of years? Oh yeah, 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago. Nearly 3,000 years ago, actually, because the 1st century is a 0 kind of a deal. So we've got this interesting thing that goes all the way back there, and then an Egyptologist has decided, off their own merit, that it's a misunderstanding of the language because nobody can read it now. She means she can't read it now because we're going back a few thousand years. They probably did understand it. So I always find these aberrations, these dismissive attitudes of modern scientists or researchers or doctors, doctorates, PhDs, I'm not talking medical doctors, but even them, of dismissing something simply because they don't understand it. I find that fascinating. There's no science in that at all. There's no exploration into what might have been going on there. Now, she's saying that they've misunderstood that the mummy would come to life, but at the bottom end of it all, the notion is that there's this curse. And the curse, as it's understood by modern Egyptologists, dates back to their awareness to the first 100 years after Christ was born, after Christ died, okay? So we've got an interesting history here that is not recent, and I really wanted to emphasize that because of the amount of articles that, if you go look on yourself, will say there's no such thing as the curse because it wasn't written on the walls. But in actual fact, the curse was one that was perpetuated. Now, it may have been perpetuated to stop plundering, but if you go back 3,000 years, perhaps plundering wasn't really a common event either. Getting into these tombs is a major deal. It's not an easy thing. Look at the guys searching for them now. Getting into them back then when they were out in the open, they were freshly sealed, would have been a huge, huge event all by itself. So moving right along, the novelist Marie Corelli, she wrote about this Arab superstition, and that's what she called it, this Arab superstition, in a letter to the press before the death of Carnarvon. So this is important because Carnarvon is one of the victims, if you like, of the curse. Marie says, I cannot but think some risks are run by breaking into the last rest of a king in Egypt whose tomb is specifically and solemnly guarded, and robbing him of his possessions. According to a rare book I possess, The Egyptian History of the Pyramids, an ancient Arabic text, by the way, the most dire punishment follows any rash intruder into a sealed tomb. The book names secret poisons enclosed in boxes in such wise that those who touch them shall not know how they come to suffer. That is why I ask, what is a mosquito bite that has so seriously infected Lord Carnarvon? Now, was it a mosquito bite that has so seriously infected Lord Carnarvon? Now, at this point, what you've got to understand, she knows that Lord Carnarvon's sick, but he has not yet died. It's an interesting thing. I read articles that said actually it wasn't too unusual for a person to have a mosquito bite and die. When I started looking into that, in Egypt we're talking about, we're not talking about the Amazon or weird places. When I looked into that, I didn't see any real records of other excavators, well known or otherwise, suffering the same fate. They had been excavating tombs in Egypt for hundreds of years, not 10 years. So we are looking at this as being a fairly significant event, actually. So was there poison in the system that wasn't enough to kill him, that once he got the mosquito bite, it brings everything to light? Or did it go the other way around? That in actual fact, maybe it wasn't a mosquito bite, but a slower acting poison. There's an interesting thing around here. You would be wanting your people not to plunder your king's tombs, but there would also be this understanding too, which when I saw the King Tut, exhibition in Auckland at the War Memorial Museum many years ago, when it was going around the world, I can remember feeling a little saddened because they could have left things intact and photographed it and filmed it, maybe not in that time, but if they left it intact as time went by, you could have this beautiful look through this tomb in situ. You could have a look at it and see, what it looked like when these guys went in there. And here's a picture of Carter and a helper with the tomb open. To me, it's no different to if you go into a graveyard now and you start hauling coffins out and opening them up and having a sticky beak, and there might be watches and rings and little artifacts buried in that coffin with that person. We're all horrified at the idea of doing that for no good reason. And here we are, as nationals and as globals, we are doing exactly that and have done exactly that for a long time, and we're still doing that. For whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be a decent respect. You've got Carter running around going, look at me, aren't I great? We've excavated this, we've found this, da-da-da-da-da. Well, the truth about that is that, yeah, okay, it's a great discovery, I get that. There are ways we could deal with that respectfully, however, and not break it all down. And again, now we've got bits that are disappearing into the nethers, and it's great for the Cairo Museum. It's great income for Egypt. I get all of that, but I do feel it could have been done a little differently. 1927, it was all about making names. It was all about, I'm going to make my name for the rest of my life, and see how we go there. So anyway, when Carnarvon did die, it appeared to many that she had been proven correct, and this is Marie Corelli, and this is where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle jumps in. He announced that he was convinced that Carnarvon had been killed by the Pharaoh's curse, and that's what started the name, the Pharaoh's curse. But it's important to understand it's not specifically related to Tutankhamun. It was something that's gone on and on and on. Now, it could have been something that was brought forward just to scare people away, but I think, too, that there was a huge solemnity and a huge belief around what the tomb was to do. It was to send a person into their afterlife, the best afterlife they could have. It was to direct the kings, the pharaohs of the day were thought to be gods. They thought to have come from the heavens or be descendants of the heavens, which we'll talk about in the Planets of the God as well, just saying. When you look at that, this is a huge, big deal. This guy's tomb is something that connects all of Egyptians to the afterlife because he's there, he's going there, he's got all of these things around him aren't just to prove that he was a rich king and all the rest of it. They're to help him on his journey. And if he needs to pay anything to get where he's got to go, he's got what he needs. But he's also not going to be scared because he's got the things around him that are familiar to him that he knows very well. He's got daggers. He's got things for his own protection. That's not the protection of the dead body. They mummified it for a reason. They mummified it to maintain that body because while it was maintained, this person lives in the afterlife. Fascinating stuff, I've got to tell you. But if you don't understand that, then this all becomes a lot less important because with that, forgetting curses, this is like a big deal. without all of this stuff around him, we can go, oh, but he's been dead a couple of thousand years. He's either there or he's not. Well, is he? Because their belief was that this connection was to be maintained. It was to be maintained so he can walk in the afterlife. And so as soon as you break that up, as soon as you pull that down, you have another situation entirely. You could be setting him adrift, if you like, if you have that belief. So I find that kind of an interesting thing, and it saddened me a little bit because of that only, because I just sort of felt at the time, this was buried with this man with all of this purpose, which they're telling me about in the museum. It's on the displays, and this was buried with him because, and I'm like, and you've broken all of that up, and you feel proud of yourselves. I thought it was kind of weird. The actual mummy itself, not particularly pretty, but now they've taken all the wrappings off, they've taken everything off, they've exposed it to air. So now everything's starting to deteriorate except these artifacts, that were around him, because there's no way to prevent the deterioration after a time. That's one of those other sad facts. When Carnarvon died, though, when the curse, there was Sir Henry Rider Haggard. He wrote King Solomon's Mines. He described the idea of the curse as dangerous. Now, I like this because we've got the skeptic thing, sort of, and we've got people quoting him left, right, and centre on their blogs and their articles, stating, that it's dangerous. And it sounds like he doesn't believe in it, but I've got another take on that, because he actually says the curse is dangerous because it goes to swell the rising tide of superstition, which at present seems to be overflowing the world. Now, he's saying, there's this tide of superstition. He's saying that the curse is superstition. He's writing, by the way, about King Solomon's Mines, on the other hand. So you wonder, too, if his comment is off the cuff to get himself in the paper, to get himself in the magazines, to get himself, out there, so that people will look at him, because forever they're going to put author of King Solomon's Mines right there. But the interesting thing is he's talking about superstition is dangerous. Now, if superstition is just superstition, and people can get into this groundswell of running around and killing people like witches and so on because of their superstitions, you'll find that superstition doesn't usually lead to those kind of behaviors, but religion does. Through history, you can go back and back and back and back, and you'll find actually when they say, these people killed witches because they were superstitions, you'll actually find, no, they killed them because they were religious, and this was considered anti-religious, therefore sacrilegious, therefore they should die. And that has been a motto of religion forever and still current today. Two of the main feuding countries in the world both have opposing religions that come from the same place. Basically, you're this religion, you're that religion. They're not even talking about countries anymore. Now, while oil or whatever else might be under that, the truth is we've got two religions, two dominant religions going head to head, which they have done for centuries, actually millennia. This has happened. So anyway, we're moving right along. We start to look at who's been affected by these curses. This picture actually is the original tomb site and the room. I mean, they're so ornate. They're so amazingly constructed. They are just phenomenal. I did see the plans for his tomb, and I was going to put it in here, but I forgot, so I'm sorry about that. Because when you start looking at that and you think this is under this amazing structure, it's phenomenal. They didn't put all of that effort into this for vanity. I know there are those experts over the years who've listened to historical shows and biographies and read biographies, and there's often they talk about this is just, man's ego and a king's ego and all the rest of it. And I'm like, well, constructing a major palace is about power and authority. There's no doubt about that. It's stamping you can visibly be seen from all around the country. Nobody can all around the district or region. Nobody can forget you're there. Popping them on a hill dominates the whole area. It lets everybody know, bang, you're there. So I kind of get that. It makes every bit of sense to me if you're going to be an authority figure. But these guys, when you talk about egos, they had a belief in their life and themselves that goes beyond that. This is an 18-year-old boy, Tutankhamun. He died at a very young age. And so we haven't developed that manly sense yet of being that authority. No matter what, he could even be a primped, preened, spoilt brat for all we know, but he isn't a man yet. He hasn't got authority yet. At 18, he's looking to have it rather than I've got it, if that makes any sense. And so at 18, how is it that this tomb is ready for him to go into? How is it that this is all done and dusted when it's such a big effort, a big job. And that's the thing. They're starting this from their birth. It's not being started by themselves. It takes years to create the area that they put him into. So it's there, and it's being constructed. And so the next one is being constructed for the next pharaoh, and so on. They're being constructed throughout their lives. Readiness for the day that they will be needing to transform themselves and move somewhere else. Major important factor there, right? When you've got something that takes a lifetime or 2 or 3 generations to create, the original creator may have started that with an egotistical ideal. The chances are kind of slim, you know. In a modern world, we look at most major cities have things like sky cities or sky towers, those kind of things, and so that people can have a look around the city. And when they first proposed by a mayor, usually it's a local authority, it's like, okay, you know, this is his remnant, this is his ego, blah, 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 blah. In actual fact, it's all about the money. It's all about the creation of something that's beautiful. It's about something other people can enjoy. So it's, even if ego is a part of it, there's something so much bigger involved in that. But the victims of the curse are actually legend in themselves. And so as we move through that idea, we can start popping a few things, you know, into the basket. There's this, let's have a look. Oh, hang on, I've lost my place here because I've got the names. Here we go. Just as a quick run through, Lord Carnarvon was the first to succumb to the curse, and Lord Carnarvon was the financier, not Carter, who went into the tomb. So we're looking at the guy who put the money behind it. And there's a little theory I've got too when they talk about who got hurt and who didn't. It's a bit interesting in itself. The man who financed the excavation is Lord Carnarvon, and he's the one that died. He accidentally tore, apparently, a mosquito bite open while shaving. He ended up dying of blood poisoning shortly thereafter. I don't know about you, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Even in the 1920s, Lord Carnarvon's a rich dude. He's not scrabbling around in the bush. You know, he's got the money to be looked after, to deal with himself. This occurred only a few months after the tomb was opened, and a mere 6 weeks after the press started reporting on the curse that was thought to afflict anyone associated with disturbing the mummy. Now, this line is important because they've got here that it was thought to afflict anyone associated with disturbing the mummy, not the tomb, the mummy. And I think that's a really profound moment to think about, because skeptics or bloggers that are against, and article writers in the past that are against the idea of the curse, often mention things like, well, look at all the people that entered that tomb that weren't injured. Well, quite rightly, if this is a key statement, then there's only actually a few of them that would have been involved with the mummy itself, as in disturbing it, lifting it, moving it, and that in itself is interesting. Who physically did that? Now, the backer, who may not physically have done it, I don't know. He may have physically been there. There's very little information about what his actual involvement was there, whether he was hands-on, even once it was found, right, or whether he wasn't. He would have been, as the money behind it, the guy deciding where it went, how it was treated, how it was handled, right? There's no doubt about that at all. We've got Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy. He was Fahmy Bey of Egypt. He was shot dead by his wife in 1923. We've got Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who supposedly x-rayed the mummy, and we'll talk about him. Sir Lee Stack, the Governor-General of Sudan, who was assassinated in 1924. Arthur Mace of Carter's excavation team, said to have died of poisoning. Carter's secretary, Richard Bethel, who died smothered in his bed in 1929, and his father, who committed suicide the year later. Quite a lineup. In fact, the Howard Carter, who actually discovered the existence of the tomb, gave a paperweight to his friend Sir Bruce Ingham as a gift. The paperweight, appropriately or inappropriately, I guess, consisted of a mummified hand wearing a bracelet that was supposedly inscribed with, I don't know about the inscription, to be honest. I've heard that it isn't right, so I'm not going to go there. But it's an interesting gift. Ingham House burned to the ground not long after receiving the gift, and when he tried to rebuild it, it was hit with a flood. That's colossal bad luck at the very least, right? We're going from fire to water, for God's sake. It's like the polar opposites of what it could be. George J. Gould was a wealthy financier who visited the tomb of Tutankhamun and fell sick almost immediately afterwards. He never really recovered and died of a high fever a few months later. Now, again, I want to bring your mind back to the idea that there may have been poison items in the tomb itself. That's a possibility, but the curse is also he may not have had much to touch by that time once he went and visited it. It is said that Lord Carnarvon's brother Audrey Herbert suffered from King Tut's curse merely by being related to the financier. But this is the thing. We don't know who actively was involved in transportation. And these are the bits that are noticeably missing from the information that nobody's bothered to check out. I'm sure there's a good paper trail, by the way, for something as phenomenal as this in its day. There would have been a paper trail for every item. There would have been transport details for every item. There would have been a custodian for every part of the shipments and the movements of it. This wouldn't have been just sent out there. We didn't have delivery services like we do now where you just pay a company to come in and do it. While there would have been organizations assisting, they would have all been hired specifically for this job by individuals and managed by individuals. And so we can't really know who dealt with specifically the mummy or certain items. But anyway, Herbert, having had no such problems before, became totally blind. It was mistakenly believed that his rotten, infected teeth were somehow interfering with his vision and had every single tooth pulled from his head in an effort to regain his sight. Needless to say, it didn't work. He did, however, die of blood poisoning as a result of the surgery just 5 months after the death of his cursed brother. Now we're looking at something, I shouldn't have said cursed, I should have said cursed, I'm sorry, his cursed brother. We've now got 3 people that have died of blood poisoning that were associated with the exhibit. Bearing in mind the lack of ability to go into that blood and find out what was actually poisoning them, it might be an interesting thing to have a look at those bodies today and take samples, because there may or may not be something worth discovering. I personally think that would be pretty awesome. There was Hugh Evelyn White, was so terrified of the curse that he killed himself. Fear of the curse, the pharaohs dies aged Pierre. Pierre, we're talking, this is a man of substance, money, wealth in England at the time. This is the newspaper report of that death that you're looking at there. He said, I'll tell you that I couldn't find a super credible source to really back this up, but there is the newspaper articles that are there. So when we're talking about super credible, we're talking about the witnesses saying why he died, why he killed himself. Evelyn White was an archaeologist who helped during the excavation, and after seeing death sweep over his fellow crew members in 1923, he wrote, I've succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear, and hanged himself. One account does say he wrote this in his own blood, but I'm not so sure about that. If he hung himself, then why would he be cutting himself? I don't know about that, but the evidence is out. American Egyptologist Aaron Ember was friends with many of the people who were present when the tomb was opened, including Lord Carnarvon. And here we see that same kind of association with opening the tomb rather than the mummy itself. And because we don't know who handled that mummy, we don't know who touched it. They did take the top off it and have a look at it before it went anywhere. They had a look at it. And so who did that? Who was present at that moment isn't actually described in totality. While there are plenty of pictures around it, that doesn't necessarily mean, well, those people were in the picture, doesn't mean they actually handled the mummy. So we're talking about who disrupted it, who touched it. Richard Bethel, who was Howard Carter's secretary and the first person behind Carter to enter the tomb. He died in I've skipped a bit, sorry. Including Lord Carnarvon. Ember died in 1926 when his house burned down. He could have exited safely. So we got another house burning. He could have exited safely, but was trying to save a book he had been working on, which was the Egyptian Book of the Dead. He didn't write that, but clearly he was translating it. Who was Howard's, now we move to Richard Bethel, Howard Carter's secretary and the first person behind him to enter the tomb. He died in 1929, which is 7 years later, and seems a bit of a stretch, except for he died of respiratory failure at the young age of 35. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a question, and they're considering some of the other deaths and motions and movements that are going on there. You didn't have to be an excavator, of course, or a financier, because Archibald Douglas Reed, he x-rayed King Tut. And now here we go about this mummy bit that I keep referring to. Who touched the bloody mummy? Who moved it? Who unwrapped it? Who lifted the top off it? Who did all of this stuff to it? Because Archibald Reed did x-ray it, and before he ended up in the Museum of Cairo. He got sick the very next day and was dead 3 days later. There is no account as to what killed him. Now, we could argue, if you like, that there were fumes from the mummy, there was something coming out of it, there were toxins, whatever. But no scientists seem to have said that. And why haven't they said that? Why hasn't somebody stepped forward and gone, well, there might have been poisons, it might have been bad air, there might have been toxins in the tomb itself or in the mummy itself when you opened it up that would have filled your nostrils or your lungs or poisoned your blood. If you touched it, it could have gone in through your skin. Nobody's actually said that. If they had, then they could have put this to bed. So why haven't they suggested that? Why hasn't that been a proposition? I'll tell you why. Because there is distance between certain events and the space, and maybe they didn't all actually touch the mummy itself. For example, a machine of some sort would have needed to lift that heavy cover off the top of the tomb. Removing the mask of Tutankhamun would have had to have been done in fairly sterile conditions, even in 1927. So you didn't do any damage to the mummy itself. Quite an interesting thing. Another famous Egyptologist, James Henry Breasted, was working with Carter when the tomb was opened also, shortly after he alleged returning home to find that his pet canary had been eaten by a cobra. The cobra was still occupying the cage. Since the cobra is a symbol of the Egyptian monarchy that the kings wore on their heads, and there is one on Tutankhamun's death mask, which you can see there, it represented protection for the kings or for the dead. It's an ominous sign at the very least that he himself didn't die until 1935, although it was immediately following a trip to Egypt that he himself died. Questioning. And then, of course, Howard Carter himself, well, he was perfectly fine. He never had a mysterious, inexplicable illness, and his house never fell victim to any natural disasters. He died of cancer at the age of 64. Howard Carter, though, did love archaeology in Egypt and maybe had a deep respect of his subjects, of where he went. His tombstone actually says, "May your spirit live, may you spend millions of years, you who live Thebes, setting with your face to the north wind, your eyes beholding happiness." So if the curse is true, it's possible that those who died did or said something to insult the memory of the mummy, or disturbed it, or were just in it for the money. Perhaps they did steal something from there. You would never actually know to this day if somebody quietly lifted something out of that tomb from the day those people were there. Now, the side that's missing there, again, articles mention all of the helpers, all of those people that helped excavate, etc. Well, out of them, only a few ever would go into that tomb, and then only to work. But the nameless hordes, there's no record necessarily of who they all were, in which case you wouldn't know if any negativity befell them, if there was any kind of strange events, if you like. So that's our Tutankhamun series. The Curse of the Pharaohs. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a great fun little series. I really enjoyed doing this haunted series. If this is the first one you found, go back and have a look at the whole lot of them. You'll find them on energy-therapies.intuitalks.com. That's my website over here for the shows. You'll also find many other shows which you can have a look at as well as listen to, or you can just pop into the audio files and have a listen. So do come along. So not next week, but the week after. I'm taking the break next week, developing information and researching for the series, or for some of the series. We're looking at Poseidon and Atlantis. So it's the planets of the gods, and episode 1, Poseidon and Atlantis. Quite an interesting connection. We're going to explore the mythology of the gods, or the UFO aspect, which is apparent to many people. These can be super advanced humans, there's no doubt about it, but they could be, because they're all referred to as the gods that come from the heavens. One of the things I really liked was many years ago when I was learning about the Kabbalah and the Tarot and getting some pretty in-depth information and Hebrew understandings, although I don't read Hebrew at all, a certain amount of information of interpretation of language becomes, it crosses your path. One of the more interesting things and discoveries that I made was about, in actual fact, some of the words that were used to describe things prior to the possibility as we know it from a human perspective of them existing. And so a large part of this series talks about these aspects of humanity's development and the gods and the myths, not because they're gods and the myths, but because of the surrounding stories that strongly indicate that they came from the skies, they came from the heavens. And we've aborted the word heaven, really, as religion decided to take it. They must have just liked it, whatever. There was a point where the word heaven literally translated to sky. So when we are saying, or were a few thousand years ago saying that somebody came from the heavens, we meant they came from the sky. We did not mean they came from what is a religious ideal of heaven. So I've put that out there, and we'll leave you sitting with that. I hope you enjoyed the show. And remember this week, please, everybody, don't be a part of your own problem. Ciao for now.